Awaken your spirit. Chosen ones. People don't fear what you say. They fear what they can't figure out about you. The moment you stop explaining yourself, a strange thing happens. Conversations start without you. Stories begin to circulate that you never authored. Suddenly you're living a so-called double life, according to people who only ever had access to the surface. Not because you changed into something dark or deceptive, but because you quietly upgraded while they were still watching the old version on replay. Here's a fact most people don't like admitting. The human brain fills gaps with imagination when it lacks information. When people don't know what you're doing, who you're talking to, or how you're moving, their minds don't sit still. They create narratives, and those narratives are rarely flattering. Not because you did something wrong, but because boredom mixed with insecurity is a very creative author. Give people too much access and they get comfortable. Take some of it away and suddenly you're secretive. Funny how that works. What's really happening is simpler and more uncomfortable than the rumors. You stopped broadcasting. You stopped narrating your life like a public service announcement. You realize that privacy isn't hiding, it's selecting. And for people who built their sense of closeness on constant updates, your silence feels like a plot twist they weren't prepared for. So they label it a double life, because the idea that you're simply living without them hurts the ego. And let's be honest, if someone has enough free time to create an entire fictional series about you, complete with side characters and dramatic backstories, congratulations. You've officially become more interesting than their own life. That's not secrecy. That's influence you didn't apply for. This isn't about deception. It's about evolution, projection, and what happens when a chosen one outgrows the audience but stays in the same room. Number 1, people call it a double life when they don't have full access to you. The moment you stop giving people unrestricted access to your thoughts, plans, and movements, a label appears. They don't call it boundaries. They don't call it growth. They call it a double life. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because they're no longer in the front row of your existence. For a lot of people, access equals relevance. When that access is reduced, their ego panics, and panic looks for a story to tell. Most people are used to relationships where everything is shared, opinions, struggles, daily updates, even unfinished ideas. When you quietly decide to keep certain things to yourself, it disrupts that expectation. You didn't announce it. You didn't explain it. You just did it. And to people who feel entitled to knowing everything about you, that feels like betrayal. So they invent a reason that puts them back in control of the narrative. Calling it a double life is easier than admitting they were never meant to know everything in the first place. It protects their pride. It lets them believe you owe them transparency, rather than accept that access is earned and can be adjusted. What they really miss isn't the truth about you. It's the comfort of being included without effort. There's also an uncomfortable truth people avoid. Not every version of you is meant for every room. Some parts of your life require focus, silence, and discretion. When you start moving with intention instead of noise, people who rely on constant updates feel shut out. Instead of asking themselves why they need so much information, they point fingers and create suspicion. The irony is that nothing changed about your integrity. What changed is your availability. You stopped explaining yourself to people who weren't building with you. You stopped leaking ideas before they were ready. You stopped confusing openness with obligation. And that shift exposed who saw you as a person versus who saw you as content. A double life is just what privacy looks like to someone who never learned to respect it. When you stop living for observation, those who were only watching begin to talk. Number 2, mystery is threatening to people who live loud but empty. There are people who talk all the time but say nothing, who stay visible but never go anywhere. For them, noise is a survival tactic. Being loud keeps them from sitting alone with themselves. So when someone moves differently, quiet, intentional, not explaining every step, it unsettles them. Your mystery becomes a mirror they don't want to look into. People who live loud are often uncomfortable with silence, especially their own. They fill every gap with updates, opinions, jokes, and drama because stillness exposes what's missing. When you don't participate in that cycle, when you don't overshare or broadcast your every move, it feels like a threat. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you've chosen substance over performance. To them, mystery looks like strategy. They assume there must be something hidden because they can't imagine a life that isn't constantly on display. If they don't post it, say it, or announce it, they believe it doesn't exist. So when you show results without the running commentary, it breaks their understanding of how life works. Instead of questioning their own habits, they question your intentions. There's also a strange insecurity that comes from being around someone who doesn't need attention to feel real. Loud people feed off reactions. They measure worth by responses, likes, laughter, and validation. When you don't offer that energy back, when you don't react the way they expect, it makes them feel invisible. And nothing scares an attention-driven person more than feeling unseen. So they start filling in the blanks. They tell themselves you're hiding something, that you're fake, that there's another version of you they haven't cracked yet. Not because it's true, but because it gives them a reason for the discomfort you cause just by being calm and self-contained. Your quiet becomes suspicious because it can't be controlled. The truth is simple. Mystery isn't deception, it's depth, and depth feels threatening to people who survive on surface-level noise. When you choose to live with intention instead of volume, those who confuse loudness with life will always feel unsettled by you. Number 3. Bored minds. Invent stories to feel important. There's a peculiar energy that happens when someone has too much time and too little purpose. When people aren't focused on building, creating, or improving themselves, they start looking for excitement elsewhere. And often, that elsewhere is your life. If you're moving quietly, living deliberately, and not providing constant updates for their entertainment, boredom doesn't just whisper, it screams. And bored minds are creative in the most unnecessary ways. They invent stories, twist truths, and construct realities that don't exist, all to feel relevant. It's not that they actually care about you, it's that your life becomes a canvas for them to project importance onto. When you are intentional, private, or simply evolving out of their reach, it challenges their sense of control. They fill in the gaps with drama because drama is something they can participate in without effort. Your real actions require work. Their stories require imagination. It's easier to believe you're living a secret life than to acknowledge that your focus is beyond their understanding. This kind of behavior isn't personal. It's a reflection of emptiness. People who gossip about you, accuse you of hiding things, or claim you're living two lives, are usually inventing to escape the monotony of their own existence. They need a narrative where they feel significant, and you become the plot. The more you thrive quietly, the louder their inventions get. Their energy isn't meant to help you, it's meant to validate themselves. And here's the twist. The irony is that these invented stories often reveal more about them than about you. Every rumor, exaggeration, or accusation is a window into what they value, fear or envy. When someone insists you are living a double life, it's rarely about deception. It's about how uncomfortable your growth makes them feel. In reality, the so-called stories aren't powerful unless you react to them. The more you ignore them, continue your progress, and stay focused on what matters, the weaker they become. Bored minds will keep inventing, but your life, intentional, private, and forward-moving, remains untouchable, unbothered, and entirely yours. Number 4. Growth creates gaps. People can't cross. Growth isn't loud. It doesn't ask for approval or applause. It quietly expands your world, shifts your mindset, and changes the way you move through life. And the problem is, not everyone can follow. Some people stay anchored in old versions of you, expecting the same reactions, the same explanations, the same availability they were used to. When you evolve past that, gaps form. Gaps in understanding, in expectation, and in emotional access. People who once felt close now feel distant, and they mistake that distance for secrecy, deception, or a double life. The truth is, when you grow, you leave certain things behind. Conversations, routines, and even relationships that once defined you may no longer fit the person you are becoming. You don't announce it like a headline. You don't justify it with lengthy explanations. You just step into it. That's what makes growth so threatening to people stuck in repetition. They can't imagine someone evolving quietly, so they create a story that makes sense to them. You're hiding something, or you're living a secret life. People are used to versions of you that are predictable, and predictability breeds comfort. When that predictability disappears, their brains scramble for answers. They fill gaps with speculation, gossip, and assumptions. Growth doesn't apologize for leaving people behind, because those gaps aren't flaws. They're the natural outcome of transformation. The harsh truth is that some relationships simply weren't built for the next stage of your life. People who complain about your double life aren't frustrated by dishonesty. They're frustrated by their inability to keep up. They expect the old you, the version they understood, the version they controlled. But growth is inherently uncontrollable. It challenges old perspectives, unravels assumptions, and exposes the limits of other people's imagination. The irony is that these gaps, though uncomfortable for them, are necessary for you. They create space for focus, for clarity, and for alignment with the people and opportunities that actually match your evolution. Being misunderstood by those who can't keep pace isn't a failure. It's proof that you're moving forward. And when growth creates distance, it's not because you're hiding, it's because you're rising. Number 5, you changed the rules by not needing validation. There's a moment in life when you stop seeking approval, and the world suddenly reacts like you've broken an unspoken law. People who once felt comfortable commenting, critiquing, or controlling your choices notice immediately. They see it as unusual because you no longer play by the rules they've set for you. You stopped performing for recognition, stopped bending your truth to fit expectations, and stopped seeking permission to exist on your own terms. That's when accusations of double life or secret start. They're simply trying to explain why someone isn't living according to their standards. When you stop needing validation, your actions stop being predictable. You make decisions based on vision and principle, not applause. You no longer explain every move, justify every choice, or account for every interaction. To some, this feels like strategy or concealment, but in reality, it's just self-possession. You aren't hiding anything. You are simply prioritizing what matters over what impresses. The quiet confidence you carry can unsettle people who have built relationships, and sometimes entire perceptions of life, around constant affirmation. Not needing validation also exposes the truth about those around you. People who thrive on attention, gossip, or control suddenly feel unsettled because they relied on your responsiveness to feel secure. They mistake your independence for deceit because they've never experienced someone acting without reference to their judgment. By refusing to perform for others, you force them to confront their dependency, their assumptions, and often their envy. The irony is that freedom from validation isn't isolation, it's liberation. You gain clarity, focus, and authenticity. You stop being weighed down by unnecessary commentary and begin operating at a level others can't predict or influence. The double life narrative emerges not from your actions, but from their discomfort with your self-reliance. In essence, you change the rules by realizing that your life doesn't require permission, explanation, or applause. And when that happens, it's not a secret or a lie. It's proof that you've stepped into a version of yourself that is untouchable, unshakable, and unapologetically yours. Number 6. They don't want the truth. They want control. Some people aren't actually curious about what's real. They're curious about who they can manipulate. When you start living intentionally, quietly, and on your own terms, it makes them uncomfortable because control has always been their default. They don't like uncertainty, and your life, when lived with boundaries and purpose, introduces a kind of unpredictability they can't manage. Instead of asking for clarity or trying to understand, they invent stories, assign motives, and accuse you of deception. Their goal isn't truth. It's a way to reclaim a sense of influence over you. Control is a silent addiction. People who thrive on it don't handle independence well. If you stop over-explaining, stop performing, or stop living for their approval, they feel destabilized. They confuse autonomy with secrecy, and your refusal to fit into their narrative becomes a threat. When they call you out for double lives or hidden motives, it isn't about exposing a truth. It's about creating a structure where they can regain dominance. Their gossip, their assumptions, their outrage, all of it is a method of influence, an attempt to pull you back into a space where you can be predicted, measured, and owned. The most revealing part is that their accusations often say more about them than you. They highlight insecurity, envy, and fear of loss. People obsessed with control are rarely angry at what you do. They're angry at what you refuse to let them do. Your boundaries, your privacy, your silence, and your focus on self-growth break the mold they've relied on to define relationships, friendships, and influence. They need your life to be transparent because transparency is how they feel safe. But that safety is an illusion. They're afraid of being irrelevant, and they project that fear onto you. What they don't realize is that control has no power over someone who knows themselves. You don't have to explain your choices or defend your life. You only need to continue moving with purpose. The more they try to dictate or interpret, the more visible it becomes that their need for control was never about you. It was about them. When you refuse to participate in that illusion, the double life narrative collapses on its own, leaving only your truth, untouchable and undeniable. Number 7. Projection is the real confession. When people accuse you of living a double life, hiding things or keeping secrets, what they are really doing is revealing themselves. Projection is one of the most common and overlooked human behaviors. It's easier to point fingers than to confront personal flaws. When someone tells a story about you that isn't true, the details they choose often mirror their own habits, fears, or desires. Their accusations aren't about uncovering your truth. They're about confessing, without realizing it, their own. People who constantly claim that you're hiding something usually have something they're uncomfortable admitting about themselves. Maybe they lie, maybe they manipulate, maybe they withhold information, but it's far simpler to accuse you than to face their reflection. Every rumor, every suspicion, every dramatic declaration is a mirror held up to them. The irony is thick. The more they insist you're secretive, the more likely it is they are the ones who actually struggle with honesty or transparency. This is why you can't take these accusations personally. They have nothing to do with the reality of your life, and everything to do with the internal chaos of the accuser. When someone projects onto you, they are involuntarily showing the world their own inner contradictions, insecurities, and unresolved conflicts. And yet, They expect you to respond, explain, or justify yourself as if their story were fact. The clarity comes when you stop reacting. Projection only has power when you let it. When you continue to operate with integrity, silence, and focus, the narrative they create about you starts to crumble under its own weight. People who project will always misread your actions because they are interpreting them through the lens of their own limitations. Understanding this flips the script. What feels like attack is actually revelation. Every accusation, every whisper, every double life claim is less about you and more about the person making it. They are confessing their own patterns without admitting it, and your refusal to participate in their story forces them to confront a truth they'd rather hide. Projection is messy, but it is also transparent. And once you see it for what it is, their words lose power, and your life remains entirely yours. Number 8. You became unpredictable because you're no longer reactive. There's a shift that happens when you stop responding to every provocation, every gossip, every expectation. People who once understood how to read you, predict you, or manipulate your reactions suddenly find themselves lost. You became unpredictable not because you changed overnight, but because you stopped living on autopilot for others. You stopped feeding the energy they expected, stopped explaining yourself for their comfort, and stopped reacting to drama that isn't yours. That absence of predictability terrifies people who thrive on control, because once they can no longer anticipate you, they feel exposed. Being reactive keeps you visible, but vulnerable. It's a trap that most people never notice they're caught in. When you disengage from pointless debates, gossip, or validation seeking, it looks to outsiders like you're hiding something. In reality, you're simply refusing to let external chaos dictate your internal state. Silence, calm, and selective engagement are powerful because they remove the strings that people were holding on to. Unpredictability is the natural result of freedom. The curious thing is that people often assume that when you stop reacting, it's intentional strategy. They think every move you make is calculated. But unpredictability here is not about planning, it's about authenticity. It's the outcome of living on your own terms rather than performing for approval. You are no longer the version they can script or anticipate, and that makes you seem enigmatic, even suspicious, to those still anchored in the old dynamics. This unpredictability forces a confrontation. Either they adapt to the real version of you, or they retreat into narratives that make them comfortable. Many will choose the latter, insisting you're living a double life, because they cannot reconcile their assumptions with the reality that you are simply autonomous. The power of unpredictability is subtle, but undeniable. It protects your energy, sharpens your focus, and signals that your life is yours to direct. You don't owe explanations or reactions, and the more consistent you are in your freedom, the less influence they have. People fear unpredictability because it reflects a truth they cannot control, that your life is no longer governed by their expectations, and that is the quiet rebellion of someone who finally commands themselves. Number 9. Privacy exposes who felt entitled to you. When you start protecting your life, your time, and your energy, it does more than create boundaries. It exposes entitlement. People who once assumed they had a right to your attention, updates, and explanations suddenly realize they never truly earned it. Privacy is not secrecy, it's clarity. It separates the genuine from the opportunistic, the supportive from the demanding, and the respectful from the entitled. Those who complain about your double life are often the very ones who treated access as a given, never recognizing it was a privilege, not a guarantee. The shift is subtle, but undeniable. Before they could call, comment, or insert themselves into your decisions, and it felt natural. You were available, responsive, and accommodating. But once you start choosing who sees what, when, and how, they feel exposed. Their assumption that your life was theirs to observe is challenged, and suddenly your independence feels like a betrayal. They mistake your discretion for deception, but the truth is that your privacy has simply revealed their overreach. Entitlement thrives in silence because it goes unchecked. When you openly share every thought and action, it reinforces the belief that your life belongs, in part, to those around you. Privacy interrupts that illusion. It highlights who respected your presence without demanding it, and who acted as if they had ownership over your time and choices. People notice when they no longer have that automatic window into your life, and for some, it's uncomfortable enough to invent narratives that explain it away. This exposure isn't accidental. It's a natural consequence of stepping into self-respect and intentional living. Privacy isn't about hiding, it's about prioritizing, selecting, and preserving the parts of your life that matter most. And while some will react with suspicion or judgment, the reality is that this clarity is a filter. It keeps those who only wanted entitlement at bay, while welcoming those who value you as a whole person, not just a source of access or attention. Privacy doesn't just protect you, it shows the world exactly who saw your life as theirs to claim and who understood that it was always yours alone. Number 10. They miss the old you who explained everything. People rarely struggle with the real you. They struggle with the version of you they once knew. When you stop narrating your life, stop justifying your choices, and stop giving updates for the comfort of others, it creates a void they weren't prepared for. They aren't upset because you're hiding things. They're upset because you no longer fit into the predictable template they were used to. They miss the old you, the version that explained everything, apologized for everything, and provided constant reassurance. That version was convenient, easy to understand, and easy to manipulate. The new you is none of those things, and that's threatening. The truth is, the old version of you was never sustainable. You can't live to meet everyone else's expectations and still grow into your fullest self. When you stop over-explaining, you begin to operate on your own terms. Decisions no longer need justification, and actions don't require commentary. To some, this independence looks suspicious. It looks like secrets or hidden motives, when in reality it's simply self-possession. Your life is no longer a story for others to interpret. It's a life you inhabit fully, without apology or explanation. This absence of narration forces people to confront their own dependency. They realize they were attached to the version of you that served their comfort, not the version that is authentically living. And that discomfort often comes out as accusations. You're living a double life. You're hiding things. You've changed. They aren't wrong that you've changed. They just can't reconcile that the change isn't about them. Missing the old you is really about missing control. People liked the version of you that was available, predictable, and endlessly accommodating. When that version disappears, they project meaning onto your silence, creating stories to fill the gap. What they call a double life is actually evolution in motion. The new you is stronger, calmer, and self-directed. And while some mourn the version they knew, you are free to live the version you are meant to be. The old you was easy for others to digest. The new you is impossible to ignore. Number 11. Your inner world got richer than their outer noise. There's a quiet power in developing an inner world that no one can invade. While some people spend their time performing, reacting, and broadcasting, you've been building, reflecting, and growing in ways they can't see. Your inner world, your thoughts, your plans, your focus, your values, has become a space that belongs entirely to you, and that makes noise outside of you feel irrelevant to your progress. To those who live in constant chatter and distraction, this unseen depth is threatening, because they are forced to measure themselves against something they cannot touch or control. When your inner life is rich, silence becomes powerful. You no longer need constant validation or recognition to know your worth. You no longer respond to every comment, gossip, or critique because you understand that your life is bigger than their perception. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people judge what they can observe, not what exists beyond their view. So when they see calm, measured actions and intentional living instead of performance, they assume deception. They invent stories about hidden motives or a double life because they can't comprehend substance that doesn't perform for them. What they miss is that your richness isn't about secrecy, it's about ownership. Every moment spent in reflection, in learning, in creating, or in simply observing yourself is a moment spent strengthening your foundation. Meanwhile, the people who rely on noise to feel alive are left with nothing but assumptions, jealousy, and frustration. Their outer noise can't compete with an inner world that is alive, expansive, and unbothered. This imbalance reveals more than just growth. It exposes priorities. People who fixate on what they see are clinging to superficiality, while you operate from depth. Their suspicion isn't a reflection of your life, it's a reflection of their inability to cultivate one of their own. Your life, lived with intention and depth, naturally creates misunderstanding, envy, and intrigue. And that's exactly what it should do. Because a rich inner world isn't meant to be explained, it's meant to be lived. And living it fully will always outshine the shallow noise around you. Number 12. Rumors are currency in socially bankrupt spaces. There's a strange economy in human behavior, and in certain circles rumors are the highest form of currency. When people lack purpose, direction, or meaningful achievement, they turn to narratives about others to create value for themselves. In these socially bankrupt spaces, gossip isn't about truth, it's about power, relevance, and the illusion of control. Your life, lived quietly and intentionally, becomes prime material for this kind of economy because it highlights what they don't have: focus, depth, and self-possession. People trade in rumors because it gives them significance without effort. They don't need to build, create, or evolve. They just talk. They take your actions, your boundaries, and your silence, and spin them into elaborate stories, convincing themselves they are uncovering hidden motives or secret lives. In reality, it's less about you and more about their hunger to feel important in a world they haven't conquered. Your presence becomes a stage, and your discretion becomes the plot twist they can't explain. The irony is that this currency is fleeting, unstable, and ultimately reveals more about the issuer than the subject. Every rumor is a reflection of fear, envy, and insecurity. The louder the story, the emptier the source. They measure influence by how much attention they can draw to a fabricated drama, while you measure influence by how far you can advance without being distracted. In this economy, you are wealth without even trying, and their attempts to interpret, dissect, or expose you only make them poorer in substance. This dynamic also exposes entitlement and expectation. They assume access is owed, visibility is compulsory, and explanation is a duty. When you withhold those things, they must invent alternatives to fill the void. Rumors rise to fill gaps because silence is threatening to people who survive on noise. They mistake your autonomy for mystery or deceit, but the truth is simple. Your life doesn't operate in their economy. Living intentionally makes you untouchable in ways they can't understand. Rumors will circulate, stories will be invented, and accusations will fly. But currency only has value when it's traded. Your reality, private, focused, and forward-moving, cannot be bought, sold, or diminished. And in the end, the louder they get, the clearer it becomes who is building a life and who is just talking about one. Number 13. You trigger them, because you're not easily read anymore. There's a certain frustration that arises when someone becomes difficult to predict. People who are used to reading you like an open book suddenly find themselves confronted with silence, boundaries, and a life that doesn't need their commentary. You trigger them not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you no longer respond the way they expect. Your calm, your discretion, your focus on what matters, all of it disrupts their sense of control. And when someone feels out of step with what they thought they knew, they create stories to explain it. That's where the double life accusations start. Predictability is comforting for many. They know how you will react, what you will share, and how your energy will respond to theirs. When that pattern disappears, it causes discomfort, confusion, and sometimes even fear. People don't often ask themselves why they need so much access. Instead, they label your independence as secrecy. They can't accept that your life operates outside of their expectations, so they fill the void with narratives that make them feel safe and justified. Being unreadable is a byproduct of self-mastery. You've learned to operate intentionally, without letting external noise dictate your actions. Your energy is no longer a resource to be mined, and that unpredictability makes you appear distant, complex, or mysterious to those who relied on access. The truth is, you aren't trying to confuse anyone. You're simply prioritizing your focus, your growth, and your peace. Your life is no longer an open text for others to interpret, and that triggers discomfort in people who thrived on their ability to anticipate, manipulate, or influence. The more they try to define or explain you, the more obvious it becomes that their assumptions were about control, not reality. You don't owe clarity to anyone who only wants access for validation or gossip. Your unpredictability isn't a flaw. It's a shield, a filter, and a statement. You trigger them because they are encountering a truth they can't digest, that your life belongs to you, not to the interpretations, expectations, or convenience of others. Number 14. Being misunderstood. Is the price of outgrowing your audience. Growth is rarely comfortable for the people around you. The more you evolve, the more your life stretches beyond their understanding, their expectations, and their imagination. When you outgrow the old patterns, routines, and narratives that defined your relationships, it naturally creates distance. And when distance appears, misunderstanding quickly follows. People label your independence, focus, and discretion as deception. They call it a double life because they are trying to make sense of a reality that no longer fits the version of you they thought they knew. Being misunderstood is not a reflection of your choices, it's a reflection of theirs. Many people measure closeness by access, not by authenticity. They assume that if they can't explain your actions, it must mean you're hiding something. They forget that growth doesn't need validation and that evolution often happens in silence. When you stop over-explaining, they feel excluded. When you prioritize your purpose over their expectations, they feel suspicious. And so, misunderstanding becomes the default response to someone who no longer exists to meet old standards. The irony is that being misunderstood often signals progress. It means you are operating on a level that others cannot follow, or perhaps cannot comprehend. Your focus is on your path, not on catering to perception. Every boundary you set, every choice you make quietly, and every opportunity you embrace without broadcasting sends the message, your life belongs to you. And that is intimidating to those still tethered to superficial observation, gossip, or expectation. Misunderstanding is also a filter. It separates those who can accept your growth from those who cannot. People who criticize, speculate, or accuse you of secrecy are often the ones who never truly aligned with your purpose in the first place. Your evolution exposes not flaws in you, but limitations in them. The price of outgrowing your audience is discomfort, suspicion, and rumors, but it also comes with freedom, clarity, and authenticity. When people misunderstand you, it is proof that you are moving beyond the familiar, the convenient, and the shallow. Your life no longer needs their approval. It only needs your alignment with yourself. Misunderstanding is not a burden. It is the inevitable consequence of living beyond expectations and embracing your true path. Everything we've explored comes down to one undeniable truth. Living intentionally, privately, and authentically is powerful and uncomfortable for those who rely on predictability, access, or gossip to feel secure. The so-called double life accusations, the invented stories, and the misunderstandings are not reflections of your choices. They are mirrors showing the fears, envy, and limitations of others. What they call secrecy is really growth. What they call hidden motives is focus. What they call unpredictability is freedom. Every boundary you set, every silent moment you take, and every choice you make without explanation is proof that your life belongs to you and you alone. The people who struggle to understand you are not your audience. They are observers of a story they cannot write, participants in a narrative they cannot control. And that's exactly as it should be. Your privacy, your independence, and your inner richness are not just shields. They are declarations. They say you are no longer living to satisfy the assumptions of others, and you never have to. Being misunderstood, being judged, and even being misrepresented are all the unavoidable consequences of stepping into your true power. Your life is not a performance for approval. It is a masterpiece in progress, and only those aligned with your energy will recognize it. So keep moving forward, quietly, intentionally, and unapologetically. Let the noise talk. Let the misunderstandings form their stories. Your growth, your depth, and your freedom are untouchable. What they call a double life is actually the life of someone who knows their worth, protects their peace, and refuses to shrink for anyone's comfort. Embrace it fully, because this is the life you were meant to live. If this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more insights that empower and awaken your spirit. Like, comment, and share to help others see the truth behind what it really means to live on your own terms. Your life, your rules. Let's celebrate that together. Stay awakened, chosen ones.